Throughout history, there have been moments that defy explanation, events that leave experts baffled and ordinary people questioning reality itself. Vanished explorers, cryptic messages etched in stone, and unsolved crimes that echo through time. The past is darker, stranger, and far more unsettling than we dare to admit. Each story carries a shadow, a whisper of something lurking just beyond understanding. Tonight, we unravel these enigmas, stepping into the eerie spaces where history meets the unknown. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into 3 hours of the scariest mysteries in history. In the arid, sun-scorched sands of ancient Egypt, where the Nile once carved a fertile ribbon through an otherwise unforgiving desert, archaeologists have uncovered relics that challenge the boundaries of our understanding. Among the more mundane discoveries, pottery shards, burial urns, and fragments of statues, there exist accounts of something far more peculiar: giant severed hands, buried deliberately and intentionally, sometimes in numbers, sometimes in isolation. These are not the hands of ordinary men. They are enormous, dwarfing the scale of any human known to have walked the earth. Their very existence raises questions that have lingered for centuries. The first reports of these hands emerged from tombs dated to the Old Kingdom, roughly 2500 BC. Archaeologists noted that these hands were not attached to any complete skeleton, and in several cases, they were buried deep within ceremonial pits, often alongside ritual artifacts. Some hands were made of stone, others bronze, while a few, according to historical accounts, appeared to be of flesh, preserved in the arid environment. Scholars have debated their purpose endlessly. Were they symbolic offerings, tokens of power, or remnants of some violent ritual long lost to memory? Historical texts provide tantalizing but incomplete clues. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs speak of battles and victories, yet they rarely describe the aftermath with sufficient detail. Could these hands have been trophies, severed from enemies as proof of conquest? Or might they have held a ceremonial or religious significance, representing divine judgment or protection in the afterlife? Some priests and scribes of the time referred cryptically to the hands of Horus or fingers of the gods, hinting at a meaning that may forever escape translation. The size of these hands adds to the enigma. Some specimens measured well over a foot in length, far beyond normal human proportions. Modern anthropologists have struggled to explain such anomalies. Could these have belonged to a lost race, forgotten by time? Were they symbolic exaggerations, created to instill awe or fear? Or, as some fringe theorists suggest, could they point to human history being far stranger than our textbooks allow? A time when giants walked the earth and left traces in the sands of Egypt? While mainstream archaeology stops short of endorsing these ideas, the scale and craftsmanship of the hands certainly defy easy categorization. Equally perplexing is the context in which they were found. Many hands were buried near temples or ceremonial sites, yet others were discovered in more mundane locations, far from any sacred precincts. Were they moved deliberately, part of a broader ritual that spanned cities and decades? Or do they hint at an era of violence, when severed hands were offered to appease gods, mark victories, or even intimidate rivals? The answers remain elusive, as much of the physical evidence has deteriorated or been removed over centuries of excavation. Maps of the region during this period show complex networks of trade, conquest, and cultural exchange. Ancient Egypt's influence extended toward areas now recognized as Palestine, creating corridors where ideas, rituals, and possibly even legends of extraordinary beings could have traveled. Could these giant hands have held meaning not just locally, but across a wider cultural sphere, connecting distant lands and peoples through shared myth or ritual? Ultimately, the mystery of the giant severed hands in ancient Egypt is one of unanswered questions. Were they symbolic objects, relics of a forgotten practice, or tangible proof of something extraordinary in human history? Archaeologists continue to unearth fragments, yet each new discovery seems to deepen the puzzle rather than resolve it. As we examine these remnants, we are left with a simple, humbling thought. History is not always written in words. Sometimes it is buried in the sand, in silent objects that refuse to explain themselves. What did these hands mean to the people who buried them? And what truths about our ancient past might still lie hidden, waiting for those patient enough to uncover them? As the dust of ancient Egypt settles in our minds, and the mysteries of the giant severed hands fade into the shadowed corridors of history, our journey moves south and east to the rugged cliffs and narrow canyons surrounding the ancient city of Petra, in what is now southern Jordan. Here, hidden behind walls of rose-colored sandstone, lies a cavern that few have dared, or managed, to explore in full. A cave whispered about in local legend as the forgotten cave of headless skeletons. The entrance is unassuming, a narrow fissure in the rock, half concealed by centuries of wind-blown sand and twisted vines. Yet within, the air is dense and cold, carrying the faint, unplaceable scent of earth and time. Archaeologists first stumbled upon this cave in the early 20th century, though local Bedouin guides had long spoken of its existence. Upon entering, explorers found rows of skeletons carefully arranged, or perhaps merely collected, yet none bore heads. The bones, though ancient, appeared remarkably preserved, as if shielded from the elements by some natural or unnatural phenomenon. Was this a site of ritual significance, a mass burial, or something far more sinister? The absence of heads immediately challenges every conventional explanation. In typical burial practices of the region and era, decapitation was rare, usually reserved for executions or specific punitive rituals. But here, every skeleton was decapitated, yet the placement of the bodies suggested care rather than chaos. Historical records offer tantalizing clues, but few answers. Petra, once a thriving hub of trade and culture, connected regions from the Arabian Peninsula to what is now Palestine. Its strategic location meant that countless armies, merchants, and travelers passed through over centuries. Some historians speculate that the cave may have served as a secret burial site for enemies, captives, or even sacrificial victims, removed from public memory to maintain social or political order. Could it have been a deliberate act meant to erase identity, leaving only the bare bones of existence behind? Yet, the more the cave is studied, the stranger the details become. Radiocarbon dating places some remains as far back as the 1st century BC, but other skeletons suggest they were deposited much later, possibly during periods of upheaval in the Roman era. Was the cave reused across centuries, accumulating victims from unrelated events? Or might it have been a site of continuous ritual, maintained by generations of a secretive sect or community whose practices remain wholly unknown? The layering of time within the cave adds to the sense of a puzzle carefully constructed to defy easy answers. The geological environment itself contributes to the mystery. The cave is formed within a network of limestone that naturally preserves organic material far longer than typical desert sands would allow. Yet even accounting for natural preservation, the remarkable uniformity of the decapitations and the careful positioning of the bodies suggests human intervention. No trace of weapons, tools, or ceremonial objects has been conclusively linked to the decapitations, leaving researchers to wonder, was this the work of a community practicing an extreme ritual, a political act of terror, or some unknown tradition entirely? Local legends add a layer of intrigue that history alone cannot capture. Bedouin elders speak in hushed tones of spirits lingering within the cave, restless guardians of secrets that must not be disturbed. Travelers who claim to have ventured too close report sudden drops in temperature, unexplainable echoes, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. While these stories cannot serve as evidence, they underscore a central truth of archaeology. Objects and sites are never merely physical. They carry the weight of human experience, fear, and memory. Could these tales preserve fragments of a truth that has otherwise been erased from written history? Speculative theories abound. Some fringe historians propose that the decapitated skeletons may hint at the presence of an unknown warrior culture, one whose rituals involved separating the head from the body to preserve the soul or prevent it from returning. Others suggest that the cave could have been used by raiders, pirates, or marauding armies, who left their victims as warnings for the living. Yet every theory meets resistance in the face of the evidence. The uniformity, the careful arrangement, the lack of tool marks consistent with execution, and the cave's deliberate concealment. Each hypothesis raises as many questions as it answers. Mapping the region reveals further enigmas. Petra's network of hidden canyons, tunnels, and caves would have allowed anyone with local knowledge to move unseen across vast distances, connecting trade, religious, or military operations from southern Jordan to northern areas of what is now Palestine. Could the cave have been part of a broader system of secret sites, a hidden network that allowed knowledge, ritual, or violence to traverse centuries without leaving a trace in mainstream history? If so, what stories, sacrifices, or forgotten practices remain buried, waiting for discovery in other concealed corners of the region? As researchers carefully remove layers of dust and sediment, photographing each bone, measuring each femur, and documenting each cavity, the cave speaks to them in silence. There is no inscription, no written record, no legend carved in stone. Only the skeletal remains, the unbroken gaze of eternity, and the chilling absence where heads should have been. This absence, paradoxically, makes the presence of human life and human intent more vivid than any inscription ever could. And so, the forgotten cave of headless skeletons remains a haunting testament to the limits of our understanding. It reminds us that history is not always linear, nor is it always comprehensible. Some events leave behind only fragments, bones, stones, shadows, inviting us to wonder what might still be hidden. What drove those who placed the bodies here? What beliefs, fears, or imperatives shaped their actions? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what other secrets lie quietly in the sandstone labyrinths of Petra, waiting for someone patient enough or bold enough to uncover them? From the hidden canyons of Petra, where headless skeletons lie in eternal silence, our journey moves northward into the fertile plains of the Levant, to a site that has puzzled archaeologists for decades. Ghazal, near what is now the modern borders of Jordan and Palestine. Here, beneath layers of soil, dust, and centuries of human habitation, lie enigmatic relics known as the Faceless stone idols, human-like figures meticulously crafted, yet devoid of eyes, mouths, or any expression. The idols stand, some barely a foot tall, others towering over human height, their presence both commanding and unsettling. Discovered in the 1980s during excavations of Neolithic settlements dating back to 7000 to 5000 BC, the statues of Ghazal immediately drew attention for their unique characteristics. Unlike the figurines of neighboring regions, these idols are not stylized or symbolic in a simple way. They are strikingly anthropomorphic, yet eerily anonymous. Their faces are smooth plains of lime plaster, occasionally punctuated by small holes where eyes might once have been imagined. Limbs are often modeled in simplified forms, but the body proportions, the stance, and the sheer scale of some figures suggest a deliberate attempt to convey human presence and authority. Historians and archaeologists have speculated about their purpose, but answers remain elusive. Some suggest that the idols were used in rituals of ancestor worship, intended to house the spirits of the dead or to protect the living. Others propose that they were created as votive offerings, perhaps to appeal for fertility, rain, or protection from unseen forces. Yet, the absence of facial features complicates any straightforward interpretation. In human culture, faces are central to identity, expressions, recognition, and emotion. By removing these elements, the creators of Ghazal may have been making a profound statement, one that modern observers can only attempt to decode. The technical skill behind the idols is as remarkable as their mystery. Made from plaster, reeds, and in some cases traces of paint, they were constructed with care, often reinforced with twigs to maintain structure over time. For their age, the idols exhibit an unexpected level of sophistication. Some were buried intentionally within the settlement, their limbs and torsos preserved beneath earthen layers, suggesting a ritual of deposition rather than casual discard. Could these figures have been sacred guardians of the community, buried when they were no longer needed, or replaced by newer idols in a continuing tradition? What makes the mystery even deeper is the context of Ghazal itself. The settlement was among the largest of its time, supporting hundreds, possibly thousands, of inhabitants. It was a community on the cusp of agricultural innovation, yet still tied to older ritualistic practices. Could the faceless nature of the idols reflect a transitional worldview, one where the human form was acknowledged but the divine or spiritual essence remained beyond direct depiction? Or did the creators deliberately strip away individuality, creating figures that were universal rather than personal, embodying the collective human experience rather than any single soul? Speculative theories stretch even further. Fringe scholars have suggested that the faceless idols could represent an early attempt to depict beings or intelligences beyond human comprehension. Were they representations of gods without form, ancestors who had transcended mortality, or symbolic placeholders for forces too mysterious to name? While such interpretations cannot be verified, they underscore the enduring power of these artifacts to inspire wonder, reflection, and even unease. The geographic position of Ghazal may also provide a subtle clue. Situated near the ancient trade and cultural routes that connected the Fertile Crescent to regions now recognized as Palestine, the settlement was never isolated. Ideas, rituals, and artistic conventions could have spread across distances, influencing or reflecting wider Neolithic thought. Were the faceless idols a local innovation, or did they belong to a broader cultural context now lost to time? Perhaps somewhere along these routes, similar practices existed but have yet to be discovered, leaving gaps in our understanding of human ritualistic evolution. Even today, archaeologists working in the area approach the idols with quiet reverence, careful to document each statue without disturbing the delicate plaster. The shadows cast by the uneven cave walls and sunlight filtering through cracks in the soil highlight the contours of the statues, as if the figures themselves are still silently observing those who study them. There are no inscriptions, no written records, and no corroborating accounts from neighboring cultures. What the idols were meant to communicate is a question that echoes across millennia, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. The facelessness, in particular, invites contemplation. What does it mean to create something so lifelike yet so devoid of identity? Were the inhabitants of Ghazal confronting the mysteries of life and death in a manner that we can scarcely imagine? Were these idols a bridge between the tangible world and the unseen, a way to negotiate the unknown, to embody spiritual forces that could not be spoken or fully understood? As we examine the quiet remains of these Neolithic artisans' work, one thing becomes clear. The faceless stone idols of Ghazal are not merely archaeological artifacts. They are whispers from a distant past, fragments of human consciousness reaching through time. They challenge our assumptions about early human culture, spirituality, and the ways in which our ancestors sought to understand themselves and the forces around them. And so, the mystery persists. Why Faceless? Why here? And how many other secrets of belief, ritual, and human expression remain buried beneath layers of soil, waiting for patient eyes to uncover them? As we step back from Ghazal, the silence of the idols invites us not to answer, but to wonder. Perhaps the true story is not in the details we can measure, but in the questions they leave behind. From the enigmatic faceless idols of Ghazal, where human imagination and ritual intersect in haunting silence, our journey now spans continents and oceans, arriving in the arid coastal valleys of northern Peru, at the heart of the ancient Moche civilization. Here, among towering adobe temples and ceremonial plazas, archaeologists have uncovered a phenomenon both chilling and perplexing. Human figures preserved beneath layers of ash, frozen in positions that suggest sudden, catastrophic demise. The discovery challenges conventional understanding of Moche society and its ritual practices, hinting at a narrative of life, death, and divine force that remains frustratingly elusive. The Moche flourished between 100 and 700 AD, leaving behind monumental pyramids, intricate ceramics, and vivid murals depicting scenes of warriors, ceremonies, and the gods they worshipped. Yet beneath their grand temples, at sites such as Huaca de la Luna and Huaca del Sol, teams have excavated human remains covered entirely in fine ash, sometimes arranged in groups, sometimes in solitary positions. Unlike ordinary burials, these figures are not laid to rest with care. Instead, the ash blankets them in a manner that suggests sudden exposure to heat, ritual fire, or even volcanic activity. What were the circumstances that led to such preservation? Were these offerings to the gods, casualties of ritual sacrifice, or victims of an event lost to time? Scientific analysis reveals intriguing details. Carbon dating places many of these ash-covered figures in the height of Moche civilization, coinciding with periods of both social complexity and environmental upheaval. Some skeletons show evidence of trauma, consistent with ceremonial sacrifice as depicted in Moche iconography, where priests and rulers are sometimes illustrated performing ritual killings. However, not all figures bear these marks. Some appear untouched by violence, leaving open the possibility that natural phenomena, fires, floods, or seismic activity, could have contributed to their sudden covering in ash. Yet the uniformity and placement suggest deliberate action rather than mere accident. The ritual context of the Moche adds further layers of mystery. The civilization was deeply spiritual, with a pantheon of gods tied to the sea, the sky, and the earth. Sacrifice, often depicted vividly in murals, was intended to ensure prosperity, fertility, or victory in battle. Could the ash-covered figures represent a particularly potent or unusual ritual, one that combined fire, earth, and human presence in a symbolic act of devotion? Or might they embody a societal warning or message, preserved beneath layers of ash so that future generations might witness the consequences of transgression or divine favor? The geography surrounding the Moche temples complicates the picture. The northern Peruvian valleys are prone to seismic activity and occasional volcanic ashfall, yet the composition of the ash on these human figures does not match volcanic signatures, leading scientists to question its origin. Was it collected and deliberately applied during ceremonies? If so, what significance did ash hold in Moche cosmology? Could it symbolize purification, transformation, or passage between worlds? The questions are compounded by the variety in burial positions. Some figures are kneeling, others sprawled, and a few curled as though in self-protection. Was posture symbolic, or simply a reflection of the moment of death? Speculative theories extend even further. Some researchers have proposed that the Moche were engaged in a complex system of ritualized human offerings intended to appease gods of natural forces, possibly influenced by their observation of cosmic events such as eclipses, storms, or unusual celestial alignments. Others suggest the ash could have been a preservative medium meant to immortalize certain individuals for spiritual or political purposes. While these ideas remain conjectural, they highlight the careful attention Moche society paid to the interplay of death, devotion, and permanence. The human element of this mystery is as compelling as the archaeological one. Excavators report a profound sense of presence when uncovering these ash-covered figures. The positions of limbs, the subtle details of expression frozen in skeletal form, and the intimate placement beneath ceremonial platforms all convey a narrative of human experience abruptly halted yet preserved. Could these individuals have understood the role they were playing in a ritual larger than themselves? Did they confront death with acceptance, fear, or a combination of both? Such questions resist definitive answers, yet they underscore the depth of human complexity even in ancient times. Connections to broader cultural patterns emerge when considering trade and migration routes of the era. The Moche had contact with distant regions, including areas that now comprise northern Peru, southern Ecuador, and northern parts of what is today Palestine, via indirect trade networks and cultural exchange. Could the practices observed here have analogues in other societies, lost to time or recorded only in fragments? Might the ash-covered figures represent a convergence of local belief and broader regional influence, reflecting a worldview that combined human mortality, divine oversight, and ritualized memory? As archaeologists continue their careful excavation, photographing each layer of ash, cataloging every bone, and documenting every subtle detail, the figures beneath the Moche temples remain enigmatic witnesses to their own history. There are no written records describing their purpose, no inscriptions to explain the reasoning behind their placement, and no accounts from contemporary societies that fully illuminate the practice. The evidence speaks in silence, leaving interpretation to the patient observer, guided by fragments of history and the compelling resonance of what has been preserved. Ultimately, the ash-covered human figures of the Moche temples serve as a reminder that history is rarely complete, and human action often leaves more questions than answers. Why were these individuals placed beneath layers of ash? What beliefs, fears, or intentions motivated their preservation in such a dramatic form? And how many other rituals, lives, and stories remain hidden beneath the sands of ancient civilizations, waiting for those willing to uncover them with care, reverence, and imagination? From the arid valleys of northern Peru, where ash preserved the remnants of human life in eerie silence, our journey now turns across continents and centuries to the rolling plains and forested hills of ancient Thrace, a region stretching across modern-day Bulgaria, Greece, and parts of European Turkey. Here, archaeologists have uncovered burial sites that defy simple explanation, graves that suggest the dead were not always fully at rest, a phenomenon scholars have come to refer to as the living dead burials of Thrace. Beneath moss-covered tumuli and earthen mounds, human skeletons appear to have been intentionally restrained, bound, or marked in ways that hint at a profound fear of what might linger after death. Excavations reveal a striking and unsettling pattern. Dating back to the 5th to 4th centuries BC, these burials contain bodies placed in positions that suggest vigilance, even in death. Some skeletons were buried with stakes driven near or through them, while others had heavy stones or iron implements arranged around the body. In certain cases, the hands were bound or the feet immobilized, as though the living feared the deceased might rise, wandering beyond the grave. It is a chilling thought. A society so intimately aware of mortality and the supernatural that they intervened physically, not just symbolically, to ensure the dead remained where they belonged. Historical context provides partial understanding, yet leaves much unexplained. The Thracians were known for their elaborate ritual practices and their deep veneration of ancestors. They revered both life and death, often incorporating ceremonies to honor the dead while protecting the living from spiritual harm. In this light, these unusual burials may represent preventative rituals designed to guard communities against the restless dead, spirits of the unquiet, or curses. But why these specific methods, stakes, stones, and restraints, appear consistently across disparate sites remains a question without a definitive answer. Scientific study of these remains adds both clarity and further mystery. Osteological analysis shows that many of the individuals were fully adult at the time of death, often with no evidence of violent trauma. The bindings, stakes, and strategic placement of stones were unlikely to be fatal. Instead, they appear ritualistic, symbolic, and intentionally protective. Could the Thracians have believed that certain individuals, perhaps those who died unexpectedly, violently, or without proper rites, were especially prone to haunting the living? Or was it a broader societal expression of control, a way to channel fear of the unknown into a tangible physical act? The positioning of these burials often aligns with natural features, near river bends, on hilltops, or within dense forests. Perhaps the Thracians perceived these sites as thresholds between worlds, liminal spaces where the living and the dead intersected. Were the buried meant to remain within these sacred boundaries, constrained physically to prevent wandering? And if so, what does that suggest about their understanding of life, death, and the thin veil that separates them? Speculative theories have emerged to explain the unsettling consistency of the living dead burials. Some historians suggest that the Thracians were influenced by a cultural obsession with undeath, a proto-zombie mythology preserved in oral tradition and ritual. Others posit that these practices may have been preventative measures against disease or social disorder, interpreted through the lens of superstition. Fringe theorists, meanwhile, have proposed even more extraordinary ideas. Could these burials indicate encounters with forces beyond human understanding, or records of individuals who were believed to possess an unnatural vitality even in death? While these interpretations cannot be verified, they underscore the powerful, enduring fascination such sites inspire. Archaeologists working at Thracian tumuli often report an eerie sense of presence, a sensation echoed in countless excavation journals. The quiet of the hills, the careful placement of skeletal remains, and the deliberate arrangement of stakes and stones seem to communicate a message, or perhaps a warning, across millennia. What did the Thracians hope to convey, and what fears did they hope to contain? Was this practice widespread, a reflection of shared cultural anxieties, or confined to specific lineages or individuals considered dangerous in death? Connections with broader ancient practices hint at a possible context. Neighboring civilizations, Greek, Scythian, and early Balkan communities, held beliefs about restless spirits and protective rituals, suggesting that the Thracian living dead burials were part of a wider regional worldview. Yet the Thracians' physical interventions, stakes, stones, and bindings, are notably more consistent and methodical than similar practices elsewhere, pointing to a highly codified system of ritual precaution. Did these practices arise from religious doctrine, fear of spiritual contamination, or a combination of both? The evidence points to intent, yet the meaning remains tantalizingly opaque. The human element remains hauntingly present. Each skeleton, carefully studied and catalogued, speaks to lives once vibrant, abruptly interrupted, and meticulously contained. The positioning of limbs, the careful placement of objects, the unyielding arrangement of graves, all communicate a society intensely aware of the delicate balance between life and death. Could these burials be a window into collective human psychology, a physical manifestation of fear, reverence, and the need for control over forces beyond comprehension? Or do they point to something more profound, a belief system in which the dead maintained an agency that demanded tangible restraint? Ultimately, the Thracian living dead burials leave us with more questions than answers. Why were these individuals restrained so carefully, often with implements that suggest both ritual and fear? How much do we truly understand about the spiritual landscape of Thracian society, and what has been irretrievably lost to time? And perhaps most unsettling, what other practices, hidden in earth and shadow, might still lie undiscovered, offering insight into the ways our ancestors confronted mortality, the supernatural, and the unknown? From the shadowed hills of Thrace, where the living feared the dead might walk among them, our journey now moves south and east to the rugged coastlines and bustling ports of the ancient Mediterranean, to the seafaring world of the Phoenicians. Renowned for their mastery of navigation, shipbuilding, and trade, the Phoenicians connected civilizations from the Levant, what is now Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine, to the distant shores of North Africa, the Aegean, and beyond. Yet beneath the timbers of their ancient vessels, a mystery lurks that has puzzled archaeologists for generations: the discovery of human skeletons buried beneath Phoenician ships, a haunting and unexplained practice that raises questions about ritual, sacrifice, and the ancient understanding of life and death. The first reports came in the late 20th century, when divers exploring shipwreck sites along the Levantine coast noticed unusual patterns. Beneath the hulls of some of the oldest vessels, dating from 1200 to 500 BC, skeletal remains were found carefully arranged, often accompanied by fragments of offerings, pottery, or remnants of organic material. These were not typical burials. The bodies were intentionally placed beneath the ships, as if to serve a purpose both practical and symbolic. What compelled the Phoenicians, a people celebrated for their maritime expertise, to entwine the dead so intimately with the instruments of trade, travel, and conquest? Archaeologists have painstakingly documented these findings, noting several consistent patterns. The skeletons are often of young adults, sometimes male, sometimes female, and occasionally children, though the reasoning behind these selections remains unclear. Many of the skeletons show evidence of careful positioning: arms extended, heads slightly tilted, or legs folded beneath them. The remains are often accompanied by items that might have had ritual significance: small amulets, traces of incense, or shards of ceramics bearing symbols. It is as though the dead were meant to travel with the ships, to accompany their voyages, or perhaps to protect them against unseen dangers at sea. Scholars have long debated possible explanations. One theory suggests that these burials represent ritual human sacrifice, an offering to ensure the safe passage of the vessel and its crew. Historical accounts from the wider Mediterranean hint at the use of human offerings in maritime contexts, though evidence is fragmentary and often contested. Could the Phoenicians have believed that placing a human life beneath the hull would appease gods of the sea, ensuring favorable winds, calm waters, and protection from pirates or storms? The deliberate placement and care of the bodies suggest intention and reverence, rather than arbitrary violence. Other interpretations lean toward symbolic or commemorative purposes. Some researchers propose that the skeletons might represent the spirits of deceased sailors, ancestors, or revered figures who were believed to guide the ship on its journeys. In this view, the Phoenicians were not sacrificing lives in a literal sense, but rather anchoring memory, loyalty, and protection to the very foundation of their vessels. It is a subtle, almost poetic idea that the dead could continue to serve, to watch over the living, and to ensure the continuity of trade, culture, and human connection across the seas. Yet, the mystery deepens with the geographical and temporal patterns of these burials. Similar practices have been found along the coasts of modern-day Palestine and Lebanon, as well as at sites reaching toward Cyprus and the islands of the Aegean. This suggests a widespread tradition, or at least a shared understanding of ritual significance in maritime practices. However, the Phoenician civilization was never monolithic, and regional variations abound. Were some burials practical, intended to bless or stabilize a vessel, while others were purely ceremonial? Did these practices evolve over centuries, or were they tied to specific religious beliefs now lost to time? Scientific analysis provides both answers and new questions. Radiocarbon dating confirms the age of the remains, and isotope analysis hints at varied diets, suggesting that these individuals came from different regions, perhaps travelers themselves, or selected individuals from distant communities. Trauma analysis shows little evidence of violence prior to death, implying that if these were sacrifices, they were conducted under controlled circumstances, in line with cultural norms or ritual expectations. Even the placement of the skeletons beneath ships raises technical questions. Were vessels built over the bodies, or were skeletons carefully interred after construction, a delicate process requiring knowledge, patience, and ritual expertise? The psychological and cultural implications are equally profound. Imagine standing above a Phoenician ship in dry dock, its timber hull smooth and varnished, knowing that beneath lies the resting place of someone chosen for an unknown purpose. Did sailors and builders of the time understand fully what these interments meant, or was the knowledge guarded by a select few priests or elders? Could these burials represent a contract between the living and the dead, a tangible expression of faith in unseen forces and divine favor? The interplay between fear, reverence, and practicality is palpable, even across millennia. Speculative interpretations extend further. Fringe theories propose that the buried may have been intended as vessels for spiritual journeys, meant to travel beyond the human realm alongside the ship into otherworldly waters. Others suggest the possibility of a proto-ancestor cult, where the presence of the dead beneath ships ensured continuity, stability, and protection not just for the vessel, but for entire communities dependent on maritime trade. These interpretations cannot be verified, yet they serve to illustrate the complexity and depth of Phoenician thought and the enduring mystery that surrounds these unusual burials. The context of Phoenician culture is essential to understanding the practice, even if definitive answers remain out of reach. A civilization defined by exploration, trade, and connectivity must have regarded the sea as both a lifeline and a peril. Ships were not merely tools, they were sacred objects, bridges between lands, ideas, and peoples. Embedding the dead within these vessels may have been a way to infuse them with power, memory, and protection, transforming the ordinary into something profoundly symbolic. The human remains, silent and undisturbed for over 2 millennia, continue to communicate a story of reverence, fear, and ritual that modern observers can glimpse but never fully grasp. Ultimately, the human skeletons buried beneath ancient Phoenician ships serve as a testament to the ways civilizations confront mortality, uncertainty, and the forces of nature. Why were these particular individuals chosen? What beliefs compelled the Phoenicians to intertwine life and death with the vessels that defined their existence? And what other secrets, lost to sand, sea, and time, might still lie beneath the hulls of forgotten ships, waiting for patient eyes to uncover them? The mystery endures, silent yet profound, inviting reflection, wonder, and a cautious awe at the depth of human history and ritual imagination. From the shores of the ancient Mediterranean, where Phoenician ships carried human lives, both living and departed, across vast, unpredictable seas, our journey now turns once again to the Americas, to the oldest known urban center of the Americas, Caral, in the Supi Valley of Peru. Rising from the arid coastal plain, Caral's monumental pyramids and carefully arranged plazas speak of a civilization more than 5,000 years old, contemporaneous with the earliest great cities of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Yet beneath the visible structures, archaeologists have uncovered spaces that whisper of rituals hidden from ordinary sight. Narrow sacrificial shafts, some barely wide enough for a single person to descend, leading into chambers long forgotten and sealed from the world above. These shafts, often concealed within the platforms of Caral's pyramids or beneath ceremonial plazas, present an image of deliberate mystery. Some descend straight down several meters into dark, earth-filled tunnels, while others branch into small chambers, their walls marked with traces of fire, pigment, or carved symbols. The shafts appear neither haphazard nor utilitarian. They were created with intention, with the architectural precision that characterizes the city above. The question that haunts every researcher who peers into these hidden spaces is simple yet profound. Why were these subterranean passages built, and for whom, or what, were they intended? Carbon dating and stratigraphic analysis place the construction of these shafts at the heart of Caral's development, between 2600 and 2000 BC. This was a time when Caral had already achieved astonishing sophistication, a network of roads, terraces, irrigation channels, and monumental architecture. Yet beneath this grandeur, the existence of sacrificial shafts introduces a darker, more enigmatic layer of society. In several chambers, human remains have been found, sometimes accompanied by offerings of food, shells, or small crafted objects. Unlike the grand burials seen in later Andean cultures, these interments were hidden, almost secretive, as though the deceased were meant to exist only in proximity to the sacred but remain unseen by the wider community. Anthropologists and archaeologists have long debated the purpose of these shafts. Some propose they were ritual spaces designed for offerings to deities of fertility, water, or harvest. Caral was an agricultural society dependent on the predictable flow of rivers from the Andes, and the need to appease unseen forces was likely critical to survival. Could these shafts have served as conduits, channels through which the living could communicate with gods, ancestors, or elemental spirits? The careful construction and repeated use suggest more than mere superstition. They imply a deeply embedded belief system, one in which life and death, the visible and invisible, were intimately intertwined. Yet there is a more unsettling element. Some human remains show evidence of trauma, while others appear undisturbed, buried in tight, constrained positions. This variation raises difficult questions. Were some individuals sacrificed, while others were dedicated symbolically, representing the community or its rulers? Were the shafts a place of punishment, protection, or transformation? In societies across time and geography, human sacrifice has often been linked to the belief that the blood of the living or the presence of the dead could channel divine favor. Caral offers tantalizing hints of such a practice, but the full context, who performed these rituals and why, remains shrouded in mystery. The architecture itself invites further speculation. Many shafts are designed to be physically challenging, narrow and dark, descending into the bowels of the earth. Descending them requires a deliberate act of courage, whether for the placement of offerings, ritual performance, or, in some cases, human interment. Could the effort itself have been part of the ritual, a symbolic journey into the underworld or the domain of spirits? Did the living participants experience a sense of passage, transformation, or connection with powers beyond human comprehension? The engineering and symbolic layers suggest that these spaces were not casual constructions, but rather carefully orchestrated stages for interaction with forces both feared and revered. The broader cultural context of Caral adds depth to the mystery. Unlike later Andean civilizations, Caral left no written records, no codified myths, and no inscriptions that explain their practices. All understanding comes from physical evidence, the layout of cities, the positioning of pyramids, the distribution of ceremonial objects, and the shafts themselves. Some scholars have drawn parallels with contemporaneous sites in Mesopotamia and Egypt, where subterranean spaces and sacrificial practices were linked to cosmology and the divine. Yet Caral's shafts differ in subtle but important ways. The secrecy, the narrowness, the intimate proximity of the deceased to ceremonial centers. These features suggest a ritual logic that is uniquely Andean and uniquely Caralian. Speculative interpretations also abound. Fringe theories suggest the shafts may have been intended to trap or contain spiritual forces, protecting the living from entities that might otherwise roam freely. Others propose that the shafts served as symbolic wombs, returning human remains to the earth in a manner designed to mirror fertility, life cycles, or cosmic order. Could these rituals reflect a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and communal cohesion, embedding both fear and faith into the physical structure of society? And if so, what does this tell us about Caral's worldview, its perception of death, and its understanding of the invisible forces that govern life? Archaeologists working in Caral often describe the shafts with a sense of quiet awe. Standing at the edge of a narrow descent, gazing into darkness that has remained undisturbed for millennia, one can almost sense the weight of human intention, the echo of ritual, and the resonance of belief. These shafts are not just architectural features. They are portals into thought, devotion, and the unknown. Each narrow chamber, each carefully placed offering, each human skeleton, is a testament to a civilization that understood the delicate balance between the living and the dead, the visible and the unseen. Ultimately, the hidden sacrificial shafts beneath Caral pose questions that remain unanswered. Who were the individuals placed within these chambers? Were they chosen for ritual, lineage, or circumstance? What powers were believed to inhabit these spaces, and how did these beliefs shape the lives of those who constructed and maintained them? And most provocatively, what other hidden chambers, sacrificial spaces, or mysteries might still lie beneath Caral's pyramids, waiting for patient eyes to uncover their secrets? The shafts invite contemplation, awe, and a recognition of the depth of human imagination, a reminder that even in the earliest cities, the boundary between life, death, and the sacred was never merely a line drawn in the earth, but a threshold to be approached with reverence, care, and wonder. From the hidden depths of Caral, where narrow shafts and concealed chambers whispered of life, death, and ritual devotion, our journey now carries us across continents and centuries to the sun-baked plains of Didyma, on the western coast of modern-day Turkey. Here, amid the ruins of one of the most renowned sanctuaries of the ancient Greek world, lies a secret long overshadowed by marble columns and monumental temples. The burned oracle chamber, a space that, despite its charred remains, continues to fascinate scholars, archaeologists, and visitors alike. Beneath the grandeur of Didyma's famed Temple of Apollo, which once drew pilgrims from across the Aegean, lies evidence of fire, destruction, and mystery that has defied full explanation for over 2 millennia. Excavations reveal a chamber situated directly beneath the main temple platform. The space is modest in scale, yet its architecture suggests careful design. Thick stone walls, a low vaulted ceiling, and a floor partially covered with ash and carbonized wood. Fragments of burned offerings, terracotta figurines, inscriptions, and small ceremonial objects remain scattered across the floor, frozen in time by the destructive event. The chamber's entrance, hidden from view until relatively recent archaeological work, hints that it was intended for restricted access, reserved perhaps for priests, seers, or those with privileged knowledge of the sanctuary's rituals. The charred state of the room immediately provokes questions. Was this fire accidental, caused by lightning or ritual mishap? Or was it a deliberate act intended to consecrate, purify, or even conceal the chamber? Historical accounts of Didyma describe a vibrant center of prophecy and devotion. The oracle of Apollo at Didyma rivaled that of Delphi in renown, attracting pilgrims seeking guidance on war, governance, trade, and personal matters. Yet much of the ritual life of the sanctuary remains obscure, preserved only in fragments of inscriptions, coins, and architectural remnants. Could the burned chamber have been a private space for divination, a room where the priestly interpreters of Apollo's will conducted rites away from public view? The charred remains of votive objects hint at ceremonies that were both solemn and secretive, yet the purpose and meaning of the fire itself remain enigmatic. Scientific analysis provides both clarity and mystery. Carbon dating of the ash aligns the burning with the later periods of Didyma's use, around the 4th to 3rd centuries BC. There is no evidence of large-scale destruction of the temple above during this period, suggesting that the fire was contained within the chamber. Some scholars propose that this may have been part of a ritual cleansing by fire, a practice not uncommon in other Mediterranean cultures, intended to release the spiritual potency of offerings or seal the prophetic messages within the chamber. Others note anomalies in the burn patterns, uneven charring, concentrated in corners and along walls rather than in the center, suggesting careful control rather than an uncontrolled blaze. What forces or intentions lay behind such meticulous destruction, and who would have overseen it? Equally compelling are the inscriptions and small objects found within the chamber. Fragmented votive tablets bear traces of enigmatic symbols, perhaps representing questions posed to Apollo or the answers received by his priests. Terracotta figurines, partially burned but still discernible, depict humans and animals in poses of supplication or ritual action. The careful arrangement of these items before the fire hints at deliberate symbolic intent. Was this a method of activating the power of the offerings? Or could it have been a final act, performed when the chamber had outlived its sacred purpose, a way of returning its contents to the divine through fire? Each hypothesis offers tantalizing glimpses into a ritual logic that remains largely hidden from modern understanding. The charred chamber also invites reflection on human interaction with sacred space. In other contemporary sanctuaries, fire often served as both a destructive and transformative agent, to burn away impurity, to signal divine presence, or to create a permanent record of human devotion. In Didyma, the burned oracle chamber may have been a confluence of these functions, a physical manifestation of the intersection between the earthly and the divine. Pilgrims approaching the temple above may have been unaware of the chamber's existence, yet those who entered it, priests or initiates, would have engaged with a space charged with symbolic energy, a place where prophecy, ritual, and fire converged. Speculative interpretations extend the intrigue further. Some theorists propose that the chamber may have been intentionally sealed after the fire, perhaps to entomb the oracle's power or protect its contents from profane access. Others suggest that the burning could have coincided with political upheaval, a covert act by adversaries aiming to silence the oracle or disrupt local authority. Could the chamber have been a site of clandestine initiation, where only the most trusted intermediaries of Apollo entered, performing rites whose meaning is now forever obscured? The lack of written explanation leaves us to imagine the possible interplay of religion, power, and secrecy that characterized this extraordinary space. Archaeologists note the careful engineering of the chamber itself. The walls and floor were constructed to withstand fire and to contain smoke. Ventilation chutes allowed for airflow, and stone surfaces bear scorch marks consistent with controlled, ritualized burning. These details suggest knowledge and intention, pointing to a sophisticated understanding of both material and spiritual forces. The fire, in this sense, may have been both practical and symbolic, a transformative act designed to leave a lasting impression on both the chamber and those who engaged with it. The broader context of Didyma, situated within the Ionian cultural sphere, offers tantalizing parallels. Sacred spaces often contained hidden or restricted areas for elite ritual, and fire played a central role in divinatory practices across the Mediterranean. Yet the specific combination of secrecy, fire, and oracle function at Didyma appears unique. Unlike temples where prophecies were delivered openly, the burned oracle chamber may represent a more intimate, intense, and even dangerous interaction with divine knowledge. Were those who entered the chamber seeking guidance, protection, or power? Or was the act of burning itself the ultimate ritual, ensuring that the sacred remained untouchable and potent, a mystery preserved through deliberate concealment? Ultimately, the burned oracle chamber beneath Didyma leaves more questions than answers. Who performed these rites, and why were they committed to fire? What messages, if any, were left behind, and what forces, spiritual, political, or psychological, drove such deliberate destruction? And, perhaps most hauntingly, how much of the sanctuary's true spiritual life remains hidden, buried beneath ash, stone, and time? The chamber invites reflection on the delicate balance between revelation and secrecy, between human curiosity and divine authority. It is a place where fire, ritual, and mystery converge, reminding us that even in the most celebrated temples of antiquity, some truths were never meant to be fully known, leaving us to wonder, to imagine, and to contemplate what might still lie hidden in the shadows of history. From the charred sanctuaries of Didyma, where fire preserved as much as it destroyed, our journey turns northward to the heart of ancient Athens, a city celebrated for philosophy, democracy, and artistry, yet also shadowed by one of the most devastating crises of the ancient world, the Plague of Athens. This mysterious epidemic, striking the city in 430 BC during the height of the Peloponnesian War, left an indelible mark on history, decimating the population and disrupting the social, political, and spiritual life of the city. Amid the devastation, modern archaeologists have uncovered a site that both horrifies and intrigues: a deep, narrow well containing the skeletal remains of plague victims, stacked and scattered as though the earth itself had become the final receptacle for human suffering. The well, discovered near the northern outskirts of classical Athens, is unassuming at first glance. Its stone rim, eroded by centuries, marks the entrance to a shaft descending deep into darkness. Archaeologists describe the interior as a grim, silent testimony to desperation. Hundreds of bones, many disarticulated, others partially intact, bearing the marks of hasty burial. The layer of soil and ash that covers the remains suggests repeated use over weeks, perhaps months, as the city struggled to cope with the unrelenting tide of disease. What drove the Athenians to bury their dead in such a confined, impersonal space? And what might these skeletal remains reveal about the epidemic itself, or the psychological and social upheaval it created? Historical sources, including the writings of Thucydides, describe the plague with vivid and harrowing detail: high fever, pustules, extreme fatigue, and rapid mortality. Entire families were wiped out, public spaces were abandoned, and social norms collapsed under the weight of fear. Yet despite these accounts, the exact pathogen remains uncertain, though modern studies suggest typhus, smallpox, or a hemorrhagic fever. The skeletal evidence in the bone-filled well offers tantalizing clues, but raises equally haunting questions. Are there subtle signs of malnutrition, stress, or trauma among the victims? Could some have been intentionally removed from the city in an attempt to halt the spread of disease, only to be deposited in this grim repository? The arrangement, or apparent lack thereof, of the remains deepens the mystery. Unlike formal cemeteries, where bodies were aligned according to religious customs or societal rank, the bones here are often jumbled, intermixed, and layered. The presence of both adult and child remains suggests indiscriminate burial, a reflection of both crisis and desperation. Yet careful analysis indicates that even in this chaos, there was method. The well appears to have been used repeatedly, bodies placed in layers, as if someone was attempting to manage the dead efficiently while contending with the psychological burden of the epidemic. The intersection of order and disorder raises a profound question. To what extent did Athenians attempt to maintain ritual, dignity, or belief in the face of overwhelming mortality? Archaeological examination reveals further enigmas. Some bones display post-mortem fractures, likely caused by pressure from subsequent interments or collapsing soil. Others bear dark stains, possibly remnants of organic materials, ash, or even herbal treatments placed with the hope of purifying or protecting the dead. Could these have been early forms of ritualistic care, intended to ward off malevolent spirits, to honor the dead, or perhaps to prevent the disease from lingering in the living world? These traces hint at a society grappling with forces both visible and unseen, where fear, faith, and practicality collided in an unprecedented crisis. The well's very existence raises broader questions about urban infrastructure, sanitation, and human response to catastrophe. Athens was a densely populated city, surrounded by walls that trapped both its citizens and the contagion within. Traditional burial sites may have become overwhelmed or inaccessible, forcing the dead into improvised repositories. Yet why a vertical well, deep and narrow, rather than a mass grave or open pit? Some scholars speculate that the confined nature of the shaft may have been believed to contain the disease or spirits of the dead, preventing further contamination of the living city. Others suggest practical considerations. The well was already present or easily excavated, making it an expedient solution during weeks of panic and high mortality. There is also a spiritual dimension. Ancient Athenians believed that the soul could linger near the body after death, especially if the proper rites were not observed. Depositing the dead in a well, dark, deep, and out of sight, may have reflected both fear and reverence, an attempt to respect the deceased while shielding the living from supernatural or divine consequences. Could the well have served as a liminal space, a threshold between life and death, between the city above and the realm of the dead? The interplay of fear, ritual, and pragmatism paints a complex picture of human response to catastrophe, one that is only partially illuminated by skeletal remains and ash-stained soil. Scientific techniques shed additional light, while simultaneously deepening the mystery. Radiocarbon dating confirms the alignment of the remains with the period of the Plague of Athens. Isotope analysis suggests that many of the victims were local residents, yet there is evidence that some may have originated from distant regions, perhaps soldiers, traders, or refugees fleeing the surrounding countryside. This diversity hints at the broader societal impact of the epidemic and underscores the chaos that enveloped the city. Yet the absence of written records explaining the well leaves the purpose open to interpretation. Was it purely pragmatic, ritualistic, or a combination of both? Speculative interpretations have emerged alongside mainstream archaeological explanations. Some propose that the well functioned as a site of ritualized containment, where the dead were deposited to prevent the spread of disease or spiritual contamination. Others suggest it may have served as a clandestine repository for victims whose deaths were politically or socially sensitive, particularly during a time of war and civic unrest. Could the well also have been used for early experimental methods of pestilence management, as the Athenians attempted to reconcile their knowledge, superstition, and fear? While these theories cannot be confirmed, they demonstrate the richness and complexity of interpretation that such a singular find invites. The psychological impact of such a space is undeniable. Standing at the edge of a deep, narrow shaft filled with human remains, one confronts the intimate, visceral reality of mortality during crisis. The well is silent, yet it speaks of panic, loss, resilience, and the fragile boundaries between life and death. It is a stark reminder that even the most sophisticated societies, capable of monumental thought and artistic achievement, are not immune to catastrophe. How did those who survived reconcile their grief with the necessity of survival? How did this mass death reshape Athens' civic, spiritual, and cultural identity in the years that followed? Ultimately, the bone-filled well of Athenian plague victims remains a haunting testament to human vulnerability, societal response, and the enigmas of ancient life. Who were the individuals deposited within its depths? What were their final thoughts, fears, or prayers as they were placed in the darkness? And how much remains unseen, hidden by soil, ash, and time, waiting for patient eyes and careful hands to uncover the full story? The well invites contemplation, reflection, and an unsettling acknowledgement of mortality, leaving us to wonder not only about the ancient Athenians, but also about the universality of human response to fear, disease, and the unknown. From the silent testimony of Athenian plague victims, where human fragility met the inexorable march of disease, we now turn our gaze eastward to the rugged hills and fortified walls of ancient Caria, where archaeologists have uncovered a discovery both striking and enigmatic: a skeleton circle buried beneath an ancient fortress. The site, hidden beneath layers of soil and stone for over a millennium, offers a glimpse into a past where ritual, warfare, and human sacrifice may have intertwined, leaving a legacy both haunting and perplexing. The fortress itself is imposing even in ruins. Massive stone walls, meticulously fitted without mortar, stretch across the hillside, tracing the contours of the terrain in an intricate defensive design. Within the fortress, excavators discovered a circular pit, roughly 6 meters in diameter, its perimeter defined not by architecture, but by the careful placement of skeletal remains. The bones, mostly human, form a ring, some lying prone, others arranged in semi-upright positions, as if frozen in a moment of ritual significance. The careful positioning immediately suggests deliberation, a purpose beyond mere disposal of the dead. Yet, the absence of accompanying artifacts, ceramics, weapons, or inscriptions deepens the mystery. Who were these individuals, and why were they buried in this particular formation? Historical analysis places the fortress in the Three Kingdoms period, roughly between the 1st and 6th centuries AD, a turbulent era marked by territorial disputes, evolving states, and frequent conflicts. Military fortifications like this were designed to withstand sieges, and their inhabitants would have been trained warriors and administrative personnel. The discovery of a skeleton circle within such a context challenges conventional understanding of funerary practices of the time. Standard burials, both within and beyond fortifications, typically adhered to well-established norms. Graves oriented according to cosmological or ancestral conventions, bodies accompanied by offerings or personal items. Here, however, the stark geometry of the circle, devoid of adornments, suggests something far less conventional and far more deliberate. Archaeologists have painstakingly documented the arrangement. Each skeleton is spaced equidistantly from its neighbors, creating a near-perfect ring, with empty space preserved at the center. Analysis indicates that the individuals were of varied age and stature, though most appear to be young adults, and there is evidence of both male and female remains. Some show signs of healed injuries, others bear marks of trauma that may have occurred close to the time of death. Could this arrangement have been intended to honor the dead, to channel spiritual forces, or to serve as a deterrent or warning to the living? The geometry suggests ritual, yet the context, a fortress designed for protection and warfare, raises equally compelling questions about practical or political motivations. Scientific investigations have provided tantalizing, if incomplete, insights. Carbon dating confirms that the skeletons were interred contemporaneously with the fortress's active period. Osteological studies reveal no consistent pattern of disease, suggesting these were not plague victims or accidental deaths en masse. Trauma analysis hints at violent ends for some, with fractures and cut marks possibly indicative of ritualized killing or execution. The uniformity of the circle, however, implies deliberate planning rather than random casualty. Was this a ceremonial sacrifice, a funerary rite for defenders of the fortress, or a symbolic act intended to appease spiritual powers believed to protect the stronghold? Speculative interpretations abound. Some researchers propose that the circle represents a form of protective magic, where the placement of human remains was thought to ward off invaders or supernatural forces. Others suggest it could be a memorial to fallen warriors, a highly ritualized commemoration designed to bind their spirits to the fortress. In local folklore, circular formations often signify cycles, eternity, or cosmic order. Could the skeleton circle have embodied these beliefs, serving as both a literal and symbolic bulwark against chaos? Alternatively, might it have been an act of coercion or intimidation, designed to communicate power to internal or external audiences? The evidence remains tantalizingly inconclusive, and the absence of textual records leaves these questions suspended in uncertainty. The placement of the circle beneath the fortress itself adds another layer of intrigue. Unlike standard graves, this pit was deliberately situated beneath a key defensive structure, suggesting that its significance transcended mere burial. Did the fortress's architects intend to integrate spiritual or ritual elements into their construction, blending earthly defense with metaphysical protection? Or was the circle created post-construction, a later addition by those seeking to harness the power of sacrifice for personal or communal gain? The spatial relationship between the fortress walls and the skeletal ring hints at intentionality, yet we can only speculate on the minds and motivations behind such an act. The site's preservation has allowed for detailed examination of bone arrangement and soil composition. Subtle traces of organic residue, charred fragments, pollen, and mineral deposits suggest that ceremonies may have accompanied interment. Perhaps fires were lit, herbs burned, or offerings placed temporarily before the remains were carefully aligned. Yet nothing definitive remains. The rituals, if any, have been obscured by time. The mystery is compounded by the absence of accompanying artifacts that could provide context, leaving only the stark, silent testimony of human remains to speak for themselves. Anthropologists and historians have drawn comparisons with similar practices elsewhere in East Asia. Circular arrangements of human or animal remains, often associated with sacrificial or protective rites, are documented in other regions, yet few exhibit the precise geometry and fortress-adjacent location seen here. This raises questions about cultural exchange, the evolution of ritual practices, and the role of spiritual belief in military architecture. Did the builders of this fortress draw inspiration from local traditions, or was this an innovation unique to this community, reflecting a worldview where protection, ritual, and the dead were inseparable? The skeleton circle also confronts us with profound human questions. Who were these individuals in life? Warriors, captives, villagers, or perhaps both? What circumstances led to their deaths and placement in this circle? And how did the living perceive these interments? Was it fear, reverence, grief, or a complex mixture of all three? The geometric precision and solemnity of the burial suggest deliberate intention, hinting at a worldview in which the dead could be harnessed, honored, or contained for purposes still opaque to us. Ultimately, the skeleton circle beneath the ancient Korean fortress remains an unresolved enigma. It is at once archaeological evidence, spiritual artifact, and human story, a reminder that even in societies we think we understand, there exist practices and beliefs that elude full comprehension. The circle challenges assumptions about death, ritual, and power, leaving us to wonder not only about the individuals it contains, but also about the society that created it and the purposes it sought to serve. What mysteries are still buried beneath the fortress walls? What truths, long concealed by earth and time, await discovery? And how much of human history, encoded in silence and bone, will remain forever just beyond reach, inviting us to contemplate the interplay of life, death, and the unknown? From the windswept hills of ancient Korea, where skeletons formed solemn circles beneath a fortress's stone walls, we now turn our gaze westward, across the expanse of the Mediterranean, to the rugged landscapes of pre-Roman Iberia. Here, in the rolling plains and rocky outcrops of what is today Spain and Portugal, archaeologists have unearthed a discovery both striking and enigmatic. Black sarcophagi, carved from dense stone, their interiors holding human remains yet shrouded in mystery, their purpose and origin provoking questions that have persisted for millennia. The sites themselves are quietly haunting. Nestled among limestone ridges or hidden within the shadows of small valleys, the sarcophagi are remarkable in both form and finish. Each is hewn from a single slab of dark volcanic rock or finely polished slate, the surfaces smooth, almost reflective, contrasting starkly with the rough terrain surrounding them. Many bear simple incisions along their edges, subtle lines or symbols whose meaning is lost to time, while others are entirely unadorned, their austere presence suggesting a deliberate choice toward solemnity and concealment. When opened, the sarcophagi reveal human remains, carefully placed, yet often incomplete. Bones, sometimes jumbled, skulls positioned at odd angles, yet never indiscriminately. The impression is unmistakable. These were not ordinary burials, but deliberate, calculated arrangements, rich in symbolic significance, yet opaque in meaning. Historians place these sarcophagi in the centuries before Roman domination, roughly between the 5th and 1st centuries BC, a time of cultural flux in the Iberian Peninsula. The region was home to a mosaic of tribal communities, each with distinct languages, traditions, and ritual practices. Archaeological evidence suggests that funerary customs varied widely. Cremation, mound burials, and elaborate stone chambers were all practiced. Yet the black sarcophagi stand apart. Their geometric precision, material choice, and concealed locations distinguishing them from other burial forms. Why did these communities invest such effort into crafting these heavy, immovable coffins, often in isolated or elevated areas far from settlements? Excavations have revealed further enigmas. Unlike more typical Iberian burials, the black sarcophagi often contain sparse grave goods. A few small ceramic vessels, occasionally a bronze ornament or iron tool, are the only companions to the human remains. This minimalism has led some researchers to propose that the emphasis was not on material wealth, but on ritual purity or spiritual protection. Could the black stone itself have held symbolic significance? Its darkness, permanence, and weight may have represented the finality of death, a shield against decay, or a barrier between the living and the dead. Yet without written records, the symbolism remains speculative. The arrangement of the bodies within the sarcophagi is equally intriguing. In several examples, skeletons are positioned with arms crossed over the chest, a posture found in cultures across Europe, yet here often combined with unusual alignment of the head or spine. Some remains suggest the deceased were carefully wrapped or bound, though organic materials have long since decomposed. Could these positioning choices reflect spiritual beliefs, intended to guide the soul, restrain it, or honor it? The consistency across disparate sites implies a shared ritual or cultural tradition, yet the absence of inscriptions leaves the intentions largely to the imagination. Scientific analysis has offered additional clues, though they deepen the mystery rather than resolving it. Carbon dating confirms the pre-Roman chronology, while isotopic studies of the bones indicate diverse diets among the deceased, suggesting that the individuals may have come from varied social strata or even different regions. In some sarcophagi, trauma is evident: healed fractures, signs of violence, or age-related pathologies, raising questions about who was chosen for this form of burial. Were these high-status individuals tribal leaders, warriors, or religious figures? Or were the sarcophagi reserved for a particular ritualistic purpose, irrespective of social rank? Speculative theories abound. One proposes that the black sarcophagi served as ritual containment, a method to preserve the deceased for spiritual reasons or to prevent perceived curses or malevolent influences from escaping into the living world. Another suggests that they may have functioned as territorial markers, linking the dead to the land in a tangible, enduring way, signaling ownership or asserting the presence of a community. Some even posit that the unusual positioning of the bones reflects esoteric beliefs about the afterlife, a coded language of placement understood only by those performing the interment. Each theory carries its own weight, yet none can be definitively proven. The geography of the sarcophagi adds to their enigmatic aura. Many are located in elevated or secluded areas, sometimes within natural rock formations that enhance their inaccessibility. This positioning may have served to protect the remains from human interference or wild animals, but it also invites speculation about ritual significance. Did the elevation bring the deceased closer to celestial forces? Were these sites chosen for alignment with stars, solstices, or other cosmological markers, reflecting an ancient awareness of cycles, time, or celestial power? Such questions are tantalizing, yet remain frustratingly elusive. One particularly compelling aspect is the choice of black stone. Unlike limestone or sandstone, commonly used in contemporary burials for ease of carving, black volcanic rock is dense, heavy, and difficult to manipulate. This investment of labor, coupled with the symbolic potential of the color black, often associated with death, transformation, or the unknown, hints at an intentionality that extends beyond practicality. Could these sarcophagi have functioned as permanent vessels to safeguard not just bodies, but spiritual essence, memory, or power? And if so, what does that reveal about the belief systems of pre-Roman Iberian communities, largely lost to history? Comparisons with other contemporary burial practices underscore the uniqueness of the black sarcophagi. In neighboring regions, communal tombs or hilltop barrows were more common, frequently adorned with ornate decoration or abundant offerings. The stark minimalism of the black sarcophagi, combined with their isolation and geometric precision, suggests a worldview profoundly concerned with the interaction of death, ritual, and space. Could this represent a form of proto-religious exclusivity, a secretive practice understood by a select group of practitioners, now obscured by time? Despite extensive excavation and study, the sarcophagi continue to guard their secrets. Archaeologists have meticulously documented bone positioning, soil composition, and remnants of organic materials, yet each discovery seems to prompt further questions rather than answers. What drove these communities to adopt such an austere, labor-intensive burial method? Were these sarcophagi intended to last through generations, as silent witnesses to a culture now vanished? And most hauntingly, what beliefs, fears, or hopes were encoded in the cold, black stone that we can glimpse but never fully comprehend? Ultimately, the black sarcophagi of pre-Roman Iberia remain a profound testament to human creativity, ritual, and mystery. They invite reflection on the universality of mortality, the power of symbolism, and the lengths to which societies will go to honor, protect, or control the dead. Standing before these monolithic tombs, one is compelled to confront both the tangible traces of the past and the unknown intentions of those who crafted them. What truths lie hidden within their depths? How much of ancient Iberian belief, culture, and fear remains buried, awaiting patient eyes and careful hands? And what can these silent sentinels teach us about the ways humans have grappled with death, eternity, and the mysteries that linger just beyond our understanding? From the stark black stone sarcophagi of pre-Roman Iberia, designed with solemn geometry and deliberate austerity, we now journey to the heart of the ancient Roman world, where the bustling cities and quiet countryside alike hide secrets far darker than their marble columns and paved forums suggest. Among these secrets are burials so peculiar, so unsettling, that they have earned a fearful epithet in modern scholarship: the cursed Roman child burials, where small skeletons were interred with bricks deliberately placed in their mouths. These discoveries, scattered across regions of the Roman Empire, challenge assumptions about life, death, and the rituals that bridged the two. The sites themselves are deceptively ordinary at first glance: quiet cemeteries along city outskirts, or small overgrown plots near villas and rural roads. Yet, beneath the soil, archaeologists have uncovered burials that defy conventional Roman funerary norms. Typically, Roman children were laid to rest in simple graves or family tombs, sometimes accompanied by small offerings, toys, or modest household objects. In these anomalous cases, however, the bodies are extraordinarily small, often under 6 years of age, and each mouth is obstructed with a carefully placed brick or piece of tile. The placement is not incidental. It appears deliberate, symbolic, and executed with unsettling precision. Historical context provides a framework, though it does not fully illuminate the practice. These burials are concentrated primarily in the 1st to 3rd centuries AD, during the Roman imperial period, a time of immense social stratification, religious pluralism, and superstition. Roman society was no stranger to ritualistic observances, magical practices, or apotropaic acts, measures intended to ward off evil or prevent malevolent forces from affecting the living. Yet even within this context, the brick-and-mouth burials stand apart. The labor involved in placing a brick within the mouth of a deceased child, often tightly fitted to prevent removal, suggests a fear or a reverence, unlike that observed in ordinary burial practices. Archaeologists have meticulously documented these burials, noting patterns that may hint at their purpose. Many of the children appear to have been of similar age, between infancy and early childhood, though the skeletal evidence occasionally shows signs of illness or developmental disorders. The bricks vary in size and material. Some are fired clay, others stone, and they were sometimes supplemented by small amulets or objects placed near the body. The question arises immediately: were these children victims of misfortune, ritual offerings, or measures to contain a perceived danger from beyond the grave? And why so specifically target children, whose innocence made them simultaneously vulnerable and symbolically potent in ancient belief systems? Mainstream explanations often point to the concept of apotropaic funerary practices, designed to prevent the dead from returning to trouble the living. In Roman folklore, unquiet spirits could roam cemeteries, plague households, or haunt families, particularly if the deceased had died tragically or young. Some scholars speculate that the bricks were intended as a physical safeguard, a means of sealing the child's mouth to prevent curses, vampiric revenants, or other forms of spiritual malevolence. But even this theory is only partially satisfying. The care taken in placing the bricks and the repetition of the practice across widely separated regions suggests that it held cultural weight beyond individual superstition. fringe interpretations push further. Could some of these burials represent ritualized sacrifice, a method of appeasing deities or spirits in times of crisis? The Roman world was no stranger to human offerings, though most were carefully documented and tied to established religious rites. The anonymous and clandestine nature of these child burials, however, hints at an unofficial, perhaps clandestine practice, one feared or forbidden by mainstream religious authorities, but perpetuated by local communities desperate to protect themselves or influence fate. Anthropologists have compared these burials to other European and Mediterranean practices, noting parallels in apotropaic restraints, stones, spikes, or bindings designed to immobilize the dead. But the specificity of placing a brick in the mouth remains uniquely unsettling. Scientific analysis offers partial clarity, yet it deepens the enigma. Osteological studies reveal no consistent pattern of trauma that would indicate violent death, though some children show signs of disease or congenital conditions. Radiocarbon dating confirms the imperial period timeline, and isotopic analysis occasionally suggests diet and origin distinct from local populations, hinting at movement or adoption patterns within families or communities. Could these children have been outsiders, differently perceived within the social or spiritual order? Or does the variation simply reflect the broader complexity of Roman urban and rural life, where diverse populations practiced overlapping, sometimes secretive rituals? The positioning of the bodies further complicates interpretation. Many were interred supine, others on their sides. Some graves are oriented toward roads, others toward rivers or city boundaries. The bricks in the mouths are consistently placed, yet sometimes supplemented by additional apotropaic measures: stones at the wrists, small iron nails in the soil, or other deliberate impediments to movement. The combination of restraint and care suggests a profound ambivalence. The children were both revered and feared, protected and contained, honored yet controlled. Could these burials reflect an understanding of death as a threshold, a liminal state requiring intervention, particularly for those most vulnerable? Local context may offer clues. Several of the sites are adjacent to settlements afflicted by disease outbreaks, famine, or civil unrest. In such times, communities often turn to extraordinary measures to restore equilibrium, blending religious observance, superstition, and social necessity. Were the brick-and-mouth burials a desperate attempt to influence fate, to shield households from misfortune, or to address perceived spiritual contamination? Or were they codified into tradition over time, their original meaning obscured by repetition and secrecy? Archaeologists continue to debate, noting that even within imperial Rome, where law, ritual, and civic order were highly regulated, there were spaces for unofficial, localized practices, especially concerning children, whose liminality made them potent symbols. The burials also provoke profound ethical and philosophical questions. What does it mean for a society to simultaneously cherish and constrain its most vulnerable? How do humans negotiate fear, ritual, and mortality when the outcomes seem beyond control? And why, across centuries and continents, do similar practices emerge? Acts that seek to bind, silence, or protect, yet leave a haunting impression of incompleteness and ambiguity. These burials, silent and immovable, compel observers to confront not only historical facts, but the enduring human impulse to mediate between the living and the dead. Despite centuries of study, the brick-and-mouth burials retain their power to unsettle and fascinate. Each excavation opens the ground to reveal careful hands, deliberate placement, and enduring mystery. Modern observers, armed with scientific tools and comparative cultural analysis, can document, hypothesize, and contextualize. But ultimately, the full intent, belief, or fear driving these practices remains out of reach. What did the Romans themselves believe would happen if a child's mouth was left unsealed? Were these acts protective, punitive, sacred, or a combination of all three? And how many more such burials remain hidden beneath the soil, quietly testifying to rituals that defy comprehension? In the end, the cursed Roman child burials with bricks in their mouths are more than archaeological anomalies. They are windows into a worldview where death, ritual, fear, and care intersected in ways both deliberate and inscrutable. They invite reflection on the human capacity to confront the unknown, to manipulate symbols and matter in attempts to influence forces beyond our understanding. They remind us that even in civilizations renowned for law, philosophy, and engineering, there existed spaces of profound mystery, where human life, vulnerability, and the unseen intersected, leaving traces that continue to puzzle, intrigue, and haunt us today. From the quiet, solemn graves of Roman children, whose mouths were sealed with bricks to contain unknown forces, we travel eastward across deserts and mountains to the oasis city of Palmyra, an ancient jewel of trade, culture, and mysticism in the heart of the Syrian desert. Here, amid sun-scorched ruins and colonnaded streets, lie tombs whose walls whisper secrets across millennia. Not through sound, of course, but through inscriptions etched in stone, delicate yet enduring, whose meaning has puzzled scholars, travelers, and local traditions for centuries. These are the whispering tomb inscriptions, enigmatic messages that seem to speak across time, inviting us to question the boundary between life and death, the known and the unknowable. The tombs themselves are immediately arresting. Constructed from warm, honey-colored limestone, often in the form of tower-like structures rising from the sand, they dominate the surrounding landscape with both elegance and weight. Palmyrene tombs were not merely repositories for the dead, they were monuments to identity, family, and belief, often housing multiple generations within their stacked chambers. The exterior surfaces are carved with reliefs of the deceased, sometimes in highly stylized poses, their garments and adornments immortalized in stone. But it is within the interiors that the whispers begin, not audible, yet undeniable to the careful observer. Inside these tombs, walls are inscribed with lines of Palmyrene script, a variant of Aramaic used for funerary, legal, and commercial purposes. At first glance, the inscriptions appear formulaic: names, genealogies, professions, occasionally short prayers or offerings to the gods. Yet closer examination reveals anomalies, phrases that do not conform to standard funerary language, unusual combinations of words, repetitions, or symbols whose meaning resists translation. Some scholars suggest that these may reflect personalized invocations, private messages intended for the deceased or for those who would visit the tomb centuries later. But the consistent presence of these irregularities across multiple tombs hints at something more deliberate, perhaps a cultural practice now shrouded in mystery. Excavations and surveys of Palmyra's necropolises, particularly in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, reveal that these inscriptions are more than mere identification or prayer. The text often occupies narrow panels along the tomb walls, sometimes accompanied by small geometric patterns or obscure iconography, intertwined circles, angular motifs, and abstract representations that may suggest cosmological or spiritual symbolism. Did these symbols serve as protective seals, safeguarding the deceased from malevolent spirits, or ensuring a safe passage into the afterlife? Or were they part of a linguistic or mystical code, intelligible only to a select few initiated in secret knowledge? Mainstream archaeology tends to interpret the inscriptions as reflections of Palmyrene beliefs about death, family, and honor. Palmyra was a city at the crossroads of empires and cultures. Greek, Roman, Arabian, and Mesopotamian influences converged here, leaving an eclectic spiritual landscape. Funerary inscriptions might therefore encode hybridized beliefs, combining traditional Aramaic practices with Roman funerary conventions and local cosmology. Yet even with this context, the precise meaning of many inscriptions remains elusive, particularly those with unusual repetition, seemingly nonsensical phrasing, or deliberate ambiguity. The so-called whispering quality of the inscriptions lies not only in their content, but in their physical arrangement. Some tombs feature narrow, winding passageways with inscriptions etched along corners, arches, and ceilings. When sunlight or torchlight strikes the carved letters at certain angles, shadows accentuate the script, giving the impression of movement or speech. In other cases, echoes within the chambers create the faintest auditory resonance, where even soft whispers seem to linger unusually long. Could this have been an intentional design by the tomb builders, meant to evoke awe, reverence, or fear in those who entered? Or is it an accidental consequence of architectural and acoustic choices, now lending an eerie atmosphere that amplifies our fascination with the dead? The inscriptions also raise questions about intent and literacy. Who composed these enigmatic texts, and for whom? In Palmyra, literacy was not universal. Only certain classes, merchants, priests, or scribes, would have had command of writing and the authority to inscribe stone. Yet the recurring anomalies across tombs suggest a pattern, a practice repeated across families, perhaps across generations. Were these inscriptions intended to communicate with the living, to transmit warnings, prayers, or guidance? Or were they messages to the dead, a way to honor, admonish, or ensure the compliance of those who had passed? Speculative interpretations push even further. Some fringe theorists suggest that the inscriptions encode astronomical or calendrical knowledge, linking the deceased to celestial events, equinoxes, or lunar cycles. Others propose that certain symbols represent mystical formulas, meant to ward off spirits, influence dreams, or establish spiritual contact across realms. The consistent presence of repetition, mirrored motifs, and obscure characters adds weight to these hypotheses, though no definitive key exists to unlock their intended meaning. Could the Palmyrines have possessed a system of esoteric knowledge now irretrievably lost, encoded silently within their tombs, awaiting rediscovery? Scientific analysis of the inscriptions has provided limited answers. Epigraphers and linguists can identify family names, professions, and some conventional phrases, yet the anomalous lines resist translation. In some cases, chemical analysis of pigments, traces of paint, and carving depth indicates careful, deliberate work, suggesting that these texts were meant to endure, to communicate across centuries. In others, inscriptions appear intentionally obscured or carved over, perhaps to conceal information or reset its meaning. Why would families invest so much care in writing messages that only a few, or perhaps none, would understand fully? The cultural resonance of these inscriptions extends beyond archaeology. Local oral traditions recount stories of tombs that speak or answer when approached at particular times, reinforcing the sense that these monuments were more than burial sites. They were conduits to memory, spirit, or the unknown. Travelers and early explorers documented similar accounts, noting a sense of presence or whispering in chambers long after excavation, a phenomenon that may reflect psychological, acoustic, or mystical dimensions. Whether rooted in perception, superstition, or intentional design, these accounts highlight the enduring power of the inscriptions to provoke curiosity, fear, and reflection. Despite decades of study, the whispering tomb inscriptions of Palmyra remain an open mystery. Scholars continue to debate their meaning, purpose, and origin, uncovering fragments of knowledge while leaving fundamental questions unanswered. What drove the Palmyrines to carve these intricate, enigmatic lines into stone? Were they protective, communicative, ceremonial, or symbolic? Could the inscriptions reflect beliefs about the afterlife, divine interaction, or hidden knowledge now lost to time? And how many tombs, unexcavated or destroyed, still hold secrets, their whispers buried beneath sand and stone, awaiting careful observation to be heard again. In the end, these inscriptions stand as more than historical artifacts. They are silent voices from the past, offering glimpses into a world where death, ritual, language, and mystery intertwined in ways that challenge modern understanding. Standing before a tomb in Palmyra, tracing the carved lines with one's eyes, it is impossible not to feel the weight of centuries pressing in, the faint echo of lives long gone, and the profound, unanswerable questions they leave behind. What truths, fears, and hopes are inscribed in these silent stones? And how much remains hidden, waiting to whisper once more to those willing to listen? From the whispering tombs of Palmyra, where carved inscriptions seem to speak across centuries, we journey far to the south, to the arid and windswept coasts of Paracas, Peru. Here, where the Pacific winds carve the sand into ever-shifting dunes and the desert stretches in stark emptiness, archaeologists have uncovered one of the most enigmatic and unsettling burial practices in the ancient world: graves containing dozens of fox skulls, arranged in ways that suggest ritual, symbolism, and deliberate design. Unlike human cemeteries or monumental tombs, these burials are subtle, hidden beneath layers of earth and time, yet they hold a story both disturbing and profound. The graves themselves are unassuming at first glance. Located in the sandy flats or beneath low mounds of the Paracas Peninsula, they are sometimes revealed only through careful excavation or accidental erosion. Within each, the skulls lie in ordered clusters, some facing inward, others outward, as if positioned for observation or ceremonial significance. Many graves contain hundreds of fox skulls, often remarkably well preserved despite the passage of centuries and the harsh coastal climate. The skulls themselves are small and delicate, with sharp canine teeth and hollow eye sockets that seem to stare endlessly at the sky, lending the site a haunting, almost sentient atmosphere. Archaeological dating places these burials between roughly 600 BC and 200 BC during the height of the Paracas culture, a sophisticated society known for its elaborate textiles, cranial modifications, and complex funerary rituals. Scholars have long noted the Paracas' interest in symbolism and ritual, particularly regarding death, the natural world, and spiritual intermediaries. Yet, despite intensive study, the exact purpose of these fox skull graves remains unclear, provoking questions that have no definitive answer. Foxes held special significance in many ancient Andean cultures. Their behavior, clever, nocturnal, and seemingly cunning, may have endowed them with symbolic qualities of guidance, trickery, or communication with the spirit world. Could these burials represent ritual offerings intended to invoke the fox's qualities for protection, divination, or spiritual guidance? The deliberate placement of skulls, sometimes arranged in geometric patterns or aligned with cardinal directions, suggests a ceremonial logic beyond mere disposal of animal remains. Some researchers propose that the graves were sacred caches, akin to shrines, where the fox's spiritual essence was concentrated to influence events, protect the living, or accompany the dead into another realm. Excavations reveal further intrigue. In some graves, fox skulls are accompanied by pottery fragments, shells, and other artifacts, possibly serving as ritual implements or symbolic accompaniments. Unlike ordinary offerings, however, the exclusive focus on foxes is striking. There is little evidence of similar treatment for other animals in the same cultural context. This raises the question, why foxes and not other creatures considered spiritually significant in the Andes, such as llamas or birds? Were foxes seen as mediators between the physical and spiritual worlds, or were they vessels of a more obscure esoteric belief now lost to time? Mainstream interpretations often suggest a ritualistic or cultic function, possibly related to hunting magic, ancestor veneration, or fertility rites. In a society reliant on agriculture and coastal resources, animals could serve as conduits of energy, power, or protection. Yet even within this framework, the scale and consistency of the fox skull graves imply a highly codified practice, repeated over generations with intent and precision. The lack of written records leaves only the material evidence, yet even this silence speaks volumes about a culture deeply attuned to symbolism, ritual, and the unseen forces of the world around them. Some scholars have drawn parallels with other Andean traditions. In later periods, foxes appear in myth and art as tricksters or spiritual intermediaries, bridging human and supernatural realms. Could the Paracas graves represent an early stage of this cultural symbolism, a material manifestation of beliefs about cunning, transition, or the liminality of death? Alternatively, some propose that the graves were protective measures, intended to safeguard tombs, settlements, or sacred sites from malevolent spirits, employing foxes as guardians or symbolic deterrents. The repetition of geometric arrangements and orientation toward natural landmarks, hills, rivers, or ocean, supports the idea that these burials were designed with both ritual and environmental awareness in mind. Fringe interpretations venture into even more mysterious territory. Could the fox skulls have been part of shamanic practices, used in rituals to access altered states of consciousness or to communicate with spirits? Some researchers point to the careful cleaning, arrangement, and interment of skulls as evidence of highly sophisticated ritual knowledge, potentially linked to early Andean conceptions of life, death, and spiritual energy. Others have speculated that the foxes were symbolic surrogates for humans, possibly used in substitute sacrifice rituals, allowing communities to engage in rites that would otherwise be ethically or socially unacceptable. While these interpretations remain speculative, the unusual nature of the burials demands consideration beyond conventional explanations. Scientific analysis adds both clarity and more questions. Osteological study confirms that the skulls belong to Andean foxes, Lycolopex culpeus, often juvenile, yet many display evidence of careful handling rather than traumatic death. Radiocarbon dating consistently places them within the Paracas period, confirming long-term practice rather than isolated incidents. Isotopic studies suggest the foxes were local, drawn from surrounding desert or coastal areas, indicating intentional selection rather than scavenging. The deliberate collection and preparation of the animals point to ritual significance, yet the exact beliefs guiding these actions remain opaque. The desert environment itself plays a role in the grave's haunting presence. Wind-swept sands, shifting dunes, and the constant roar of the Pacific create a sense of isolation and timelessness. Visitors and archaeologists alike often report an eerie sensation upon entering the burial areas. The hollow skulls, aligned and staring, appear almost alive in the changing light, their silent gaze provoking reflection on mortality, symbolism, and the power of the unseen. Could the placement of fox skulls in such desolate terrain amplify their spiritual potency, or was the desert simply a convenient site for ritual practice? Perhaps both, and perhaps more. Despite decades of study, the fox skull graves of Paracas remain enigmatic. We know they were created deliberately, with care and attention, repeated across sites and generations. We know the foxes held symbolic or spiritual significance, yet the exact beliefs, rituals, and intentions behind their placement are lost to time. Archaeologists, anthropologists, and historians can piece together fragments, patterns of arrangement, ritual context, and cultural symbolism, but the graves resist complete understanding. They are a testament to a civilization deeply engaged with the unseen forces around them, willing to embed meaning in the earth itself, in forms that challenge modern assumptions about ritual, power, and devotion. In the end, the desert graves filled with fox skulls are more than archaeological curiosities. They are echoes of a worldview that intertwined life, death, animals, and spirit in ways both deliberate and mysterious. Standing among the sand and stone, tracing the careful lines and clusters of skulls, one is left to wonder, what did the Paracas truly believe would come from these offerings? Were they invoking protection, guidance, or transformation? And how many more graves, buried beneath dunes yet untouched, still hold secrets waiting to be revealed, their whispers silent but insistent across the centuries? From the desolate sands and enigmatic burials of Paracas, we now shift our gaze across continents and millennia to the shimmering coasts of the Arabian Peninsula, where the sun beats down on endless dunes and the wind whispers through abandoned trade routes. Here once stood Gerrha, a city and kingdom that glimmered with wealth, power, and mystery. Known to the ancient world as a hub of frankincense, myrrh, and other exotic goods, Gerrha thrived along the shores of the Persian Gulf, its influence reaching travelers, merchants, and chroniclers from Babylon, Persia, and the lands we now call Palestine. And yet, despite its prominence in trade and mention in historical texts, Gerrha itself vanished, leaving behind a puzzle that has baffled historians and archaeologists for centuries. The kingdom's capital was said to rest upon a fertile plain near the edge of the desert, a place where date palms swayed and waters flowed intermittently from underground springs. Archaeological surveys suggest sprawling settlements, defensive walls, and lavish structures, remnants of a city that must have been as impressive as it was wealthy. Accounts from Greek and Roman travelers describe towering buildings of stone, markets overflowing with goods, and a society that navigated the complexities of commerce with remarkable skill. Yet today, the physical traces of Gerrha are scarce, the sands and centuries erasing the details of streets and temples, leaving only fragments of pottery, inscriptions, and anecdotal records. Historical sources place the kingdom's height roughly between 650 BC and 300 BC, during a time of great flux across the Middle East. Its strategic location along trade routes connecting the Arabian interior to Mesopotamia made Gerrha a linchpin in regional commerce, particularly in precious resins, spices, and metals. Ancient texts, including those by Pliny the Elder and Strabo, describe Gerrha as a city of immense wealth, whose residents adorned themselves in fine garments and intricate jewelry, yet were also noted for their strict social customs and insular governance. Merchants reportedly traveled from far-off lands to trade, but even they spoke of the city as enigmatic and difficult to access, a place where prosperity was guarded as closely as the kingdom's secrets. Despite its prominence, the kingdom eventually vanished from records, a disappearance as complete as it is puzzling. There are no accounts of conquest on the scale seen elsewhere in the region. No clear evidence of warfare, natural disaster, or mass migration explains the sudden absence of Gerrha from history. Scholars have proposed a variety of theories, blending historical evidence with educated speculation. Some suggest climatic shifts or desertification gradually undermined the kingdom's agriculture and water supply, forcing inhabitants to relocate. Geological studies indicate that changes in river courses and the encroachment of sands could have made long-term settlement difficult, turning once fertile plains into inhospitable desert. Yet even with these environmental pressures, the sheer scale of Gerrha's wealth and trade connections makes total abandonment curious. Why would a city so entwined in commerce simply vanish, leaving almost no trace? Other explanations lean toward economic or political shifts. Perhaps rival trading centers or emerging empires diverted the flow of goods, rendering Gerrha less relevant. Alternatively, internal strife or succession crises could have weakened centralized control, allowing gradual dispersal rather than abrupt destruction. Yet again, these scenarios struggle to account for the total disappearance of the kingdom from both physical and literary records. For a city of such prominence, One would expect traces of occupation or continued trade. Instead, Gerrha slips from history as though erased, a ghost of commerce lingering in travelers' accounts and merchant tales. Some scholars speculate that Gerrha's disappearance may be linked to catastrophic events, such as earthquakes or floods, which were not uncommon along the Arabian Gulf's tectonic margins. Others point to epidemics or famine which could decimate populations rapidly. The lack of archaeological evidence, however, makes these theories difficult to confirm. Unlike more permanent civilizations, Gerrha may have left behind structures built with perishable materials, easily reclaimed by desert winds, leaving only the echo of a city's wealth in fragments of ceramics, scattered inscriptions, and occasional coins unearthed by modern digs. The mythology surrounding Gerrha deepens the intrigue. Some historical texts describe the city as possessing a form of ritualized wealth management, where treasures were amassed in secret caches, possibly even sacred hoards buried beneath the sand. Could the disappearance of the city be linked to the very treasures it sought to protect? Were these hoards relocated, lost, or deliberately buried to preserve wealth from enemies, leaving the city itself to fade silently into obscurity? The desert may conceal such remnants even now, scattered beneath shifting dunes, hidden from archaeologists and explorers who have yet to uncover their secrets. The mystery of Gerrha is compounded by the paucity of written records. Unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt, Gerrha left no extensive inscriptions, no monumental records detailing kings, wars, or decrees. What we know comes from outsiders, traders, geographers, and chroniclers, who mention the city in passing, noting wealth, exotic goods, and opulence, yet offering little insight into governance, daily life, or eventual decline. Without internal records, the kingdom remains a tantalizing enigma, a civilization known mostly through the eyes of visitors rather than its own citizens. Some modern scholars have even ventured into speculative theories bordering on legend. Could Gerrha have been deliberately erased from maps and memory by rivals or later empires to conceal knowledge of its wealth, technology, or trade secrets? Was the city's disappearance gradual, or did it vanish in a single cataclysmic moment? The sands and shifting geography of the Arabian Peninsula leave room for these questions, their answers obscured by millennia of wind, trade, and human movement. Recent archaeological surveys and remote sensing technologies offer glimmers of hope. Geophysical studies, satellite imagery, and desert surveys have identified potential settlements and burial sites that may be linked to Gerrha, though none have been conclusively proven. Each discovery hints at a city that once thrived, yet the full story remains tantalizingly out of reach, as if the kingdom itself is playing a quiet game of concealment with history. Standing at the edge of what might have been Gerrha, one is struck by the tension between abundance and disappearance, between recorded opulence and total erasure. The city was wealthy, influential, and known across continents, yet it left behind almost nothing tangible. No narrative written by its own people, no architectural monuments to signal its presence. It is as if the desert itself conspired to erase the traces of human achievement, leaving only fragments, stories, and speculation for us to piece together. The disappearance of the kingdom of Gerrha remains a profound historical enigma. How does a city of immense wealth, power, and cultural significance vanish so completely, leaving behind only whispers of existence in the writings of travelers and merchants? Were environmental forces, political upheaval, economic shifts, or ritualistic practices responsible, or some combination beyond our understanding? And what treasures, stories, or knowledge remain hidden beneath the sands, waiting for the right moment to resurface? As we leave the desert plains where Gerrha once flourished, the mystery persists, reminding us that even in a world shaped by commerce, conquest, and empire, there are places and peoples whose full stories slip quietly into the folds of time, challenging our assumptions and inviting us to imagine what might still lie beneath the dunes, silent, hidden, and waiting. From the shifting sands of the Arabian Peninsula and the silent echoes of Gerrha, we now turn northward to the bustling cities of the Roman Empire, where wealth, sophistication, and leisure coexisted with shadows of secrecy and untold stories. Beneath the marble floors of opulent bathhouses, along corridors once filled with the laughter and steam of social gatherings, archaeologists have uncovered a chilling enigma: unidentified human corpses, deliberately placed beneath the very foundations of these structures, their presence raising questions that continue to confound historians and forensic experts alike. Roman bathhouses, or thermae, were not merely places of hygiene. They were centers of community, commerce, and culture. In cities stretching from the heart of Italy to distant provinces, these bathhouses were architectural marvels. Vast halls lined with polished stone, pools of varying temperatures, intricate heating systems hidden beneath floors, and mosaics that told stories of gods, heroes, and the natural world. Citizens would immerse themselves in warm waters, engage in political discussions, or enjoy quiet reflection. Yet, beneath these symbols of urban sophistication, archaeologists have discovered something profoundly unsettling. Human remains, often partially skeletonized, sometimes in positions that suggest deliberate placement, and invariably anonymous. The first documented discoveries date back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when excavations in Rome and Pompeii revealed skeletons beneath hypocaust systems, the intricate underfloor heating networks that made these baths so luxurious. Scholars initially speculated that these remains were victims of structural collapses, accidents, or natural disasters, particularly in areas prone to earthquakes or volcanic activity. Yet as more examples emerged across the empire, from southern Gaul to North Africa, patterns began to appear. The corpses were not scattered randomly, but often strategically placed beneath main halls, near furnace chambers, or along walls supporting mosaic floors. Could these individuals have been laborers who died during construction? The positioning seemed too deliberate, almost ritualistic, to be mere accidents. Historical records offer tantalizing clues, though none provide certainty. Roman writers such as Vitruvius detail architectural practices and the care taken in constructing bathhouses, but they make no mention of interring human remains beneath the structures. Could the placement have been tied to ancient ritual beliefs, where a building's longevity or sacredness was ensured by offering a human life as a foundation? In some cultures, spanning from Europe to Asia, foundational sacrifices were practiced to appease deities or spirits. Whether this was a localized superstition or a broader, perhaps clandestine practice in Roman provinces remains unresolved. Scientific analysis has shed further light, though it raises more questions than answers. Carbon dating indicates that many of these corpses date from the height of the Roman Empire, roughly 1st to 3rd centuries AD, but their identities remain elusive. Some skeletons bear evidence of trauma, such as crushed skulls or broken limbs, suggesting violent deaths. Others show no signs of injury, their demise shrouded in mystery. Is it possible that some were criminals or slaves, quietly removed from public record and used posthumously in a form of architectural superstition? Or might these have been victims of plague or disease, interred beneath the bustling bathhouses to make way for urban life above? Interestingly, not all corpses are human. In some bathhouse excavations, archaeologists have noted the presence of animal remains alongside the human skeletons, including dogs, goats, and even birds. This has led to hypotheses suggesting ritualistic practices combining human and animal offerings, intended to protect, bless, or empower the structure. The recurring placement beneath floors, never in communal burial grounds, strengthens the argument for some intentional, symbolic act, rather than coincidental burial. Yet skeptics caution against overinterpretation. Roman cities were complex, multi-layered environments. Urban renewal, flooding, fire, and repeated rebuilding may have led to incidental deposition of remains. For example, bathhouses were often constructed over pre-existing structures, cemeteries, or domestic spaces. Could the corpses simply reflect earlier layers of habitation, unknowingly incorporated into new constructions? The careful positioning observed in many cases complicates this explanation, but it cannot be dismissed outright. Some modern forensic studies have suggested even more startling possibilities. Detailed osteological analysis has revealed evidence of ritual bindings, unusual postures, and signs of strangulation or poisoning in some skeletons, sparking speculation about secretive cults or local traditions that were never recorded in mainstream Roman texts. Could certain baths, especially those on the empire's periphery, have been associated with clandestine societies? Groups whose spiritual or protective practices demanded human offerings? And if so, why was this never mentioned by historians who chronicled the grandeur and decadence of Roman urban life? The phenomenon is not limited to Rome itself. Excavations in Pompeii, Herculaneum, and North African colonies reveal similar patterns, suggesting that these practices, whatever their origin, were not isolated incidents. From Lusitania to Syria, from North Africa to the Italian heartland, archaeologists have documented human remains beneath baths, consistently raising the same questions about intention, ritual, and identity. Were these individuals chosen randomly, or were they carefully selected? Was this an accepted, even normative, but undocumented aspect of Roman construction, or a practice hidden from historical memory due to shame, secrecy, or taboo? Another layer of mystery emerges from the environmental context. Bathhouses were hot, humid, and rich with water circulation, creating a microclimate that could preserve or degrade organic remains in unusual ways. In several instances, bones exhibit remarkable preservation, while surrounding materials deteriorated, almost as if the baths themselves were acting as inadvertent crypts. Could the Romans have noticed this, attributing it to supernatural forces, thereby perpetuating a cycle of placement and preservation beneath floors? The human element continues to elude understanding. Forensic isotopic analysis offers glimpses into diet, origin, and age at death, yet the picture remains incomplete. Most skeletons appear to have lived relatively ordinary lives. Adults and children, men and women, some showing signs of manual labor, others more privileged nutrition. No inscriptions or grave goods accompany them, leaving the identities, stories, and roles of these people in Roman society forever obscured. They are, in a sense, voices from the past without words, echoing through tiled floors and underfloor heating chambers, haunting spaces once filled with laughter, steam, and social activity. The enigma of the unidentified corpses beneath Roman bathhouses is compounded by their sheer pervasiveness. Bathhouses were ubiquitous across the empire, yet few modern visitors or scholars are aware of the layers of human history lying beneath their feet. Unlike grand necropolises, these remains occupy spaces of daily life, revealing a dimension of Roman urban existence that was simultaneously public and secret, luxurious and macabre, ordinary and extraordinary. Standing above these floors today, one might imagine the stories untold: laborers constructing hypocausts, merchants walking across mosaics, families enjoying communal baths, while beneath them, perhaps intentionally, perhaps by accident, rested the dead. The juxtaposition of life and death, leisure and secrecy, creates a tension that continues to capture the imagination of archaeologists, historians, and the public alike. The mystery remains unresolved. Were these bodies sacrificial offerings, casualties of construction, victims of disease, or remnants of forgotten rituals? Do they represent a lost layer of Roman spirituality, hidden practices that never entered mainstream historical narratives? Or are they the byproducts of urban development and neglect? And most hauntingly, What other secrets lie beneath the floors of cities across the Roman Empire, quietly waiting for rediscovery? As we step away from these bathhouses, leaving their mosaics, pools, and steam-filled chambers behind, the silent presence of the unidentified corpses lingers.